So I wanted to introduce Rupert and get it out of the way, and then I will come back and ask questions later. So Rupert Kinnard is and has been an illustrator, comic artist, art director, activist, and leader in the Portland LGBTQ community for many decades. His illustration and design career started in the fall of 1977 when he debuted The Brown Bomber, a comic strip in his college newspaper with a Black superhero, which ran for 2 years and eventually evolved to become Cathartic Comics. Upon graduating in 1979, Rupert moved to Oregon and eventually ended up working as an associate art director of Portland's Willamette Week and the newly founded Just Out publication. As a freelance designer, Rupert focused on promotional materials for progressive and grassroots organizations. And recently, he was featured in the feature-length documentary, No Straight Lines, 4 Decades in Queer Comics, which I highly recommend. I'll type it in the chat. Highly recommend you discover, check out, try to find it. That is the title. And with that, I would love to turn things over to Rupert. And thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure. I'm not sure what I'm looking at on the screen. I don't. That's perfect. Thank you. Well, welcome. This is what I would consider a ungodly hour for me to be up and about, but I really want to thank Melissa and Caitlin for inviting me to be a part of this. It's really quite exciting. I also want to thank the Portland Design History and Creative Mornings, Portland, for giving me the opportunity to speak to you guys. I'm really, really excited about being able to, in a way, I feel like I've been forced to create an overview of my career. This whole thing has really been a challenge to me to get a sense of the connectedness of all of the jobs and events and things I've been involved with here in Portland. So I'm going to start off with the slideshow. Let's see. I think so. Can you see the whole screen? Excuse me.
Yes, we can.
So, as I said, I really appreciate the opportunity this has given me to look at material and events and things that have really affected me throughout the decades of work I've done in Portland. It's given me this opportunity for this overview that I just appreciate the perspective. I think I started out wanting to be very interested in design work. I never ever have thought of myself as a great designer, but I knew in the midst of the progressive community, there were so many pamphlets and newsletters and flyers that I thought would be really better served by someone who actually knew design elements of design. So I really, I just enjoyed it very much. I was born in Chicago. I grew up in Chicago, and I ended up working at the Chicago Sun-Times in the early 70s. And it was a really wonderful thing for me to be able to weasel my way into the art department. I worked for the promotion department at the newspaper. And I used to bug the editorial art director as a kid. I mean, I was like 17 years old, and I really wanted him to know that I could draw. I kept bugging him, and finally he gave me an assignment. And the assignment was to do an illustration of Red Fox. And if he liked the illustration, he would use it. If he didn't, then he wouldn't. So it was really exciting for me as a young person to actually get a drawing published on the cover of the entertainment section of the Chicago Sun-Times. It was a real ego booster. And one of the other things that lifted my ego and boosted my confidence was something that's pretty controversial today. This whole idea of people, young people being awarded participation certificates. And a lot of people think that kids shouldn't get these certificates of participation. You should just, basically get recognition if you won. And I understand some of the thought behind that, but I really wanted to share with you guys that, as a teenager, 15 and 16, participating in the 1971 Buckingham Fountain Art Fair in Chicago during that time really gave me a boost. And I think the next year I won another honorable mention award. And so it's a big deal to me. And I think it can be for young people. So when I arrived in Portland in late 1979, I kind of gravitated towards the African-American community and the queer community here. And that's when I found out that a lot of the organizations that I grew to really believe in and the work that they were doing, I really wanted to up the ante. I really wanted to help them produce material that was going to be more eye-catching. And I was also a part of one of the first queer gay rights organizations here in Portland called Portland Town Council. And as I was working with that organization, I really wanted them to be more inclusive of people of color and diversity. And they basically told me as a board member that if I was interested in that, I should make that my focus. So that was a little irritating, but I ended up being one of the founders of a group called the Diversity Alliance here in Portland. And we were really involved in putting together all kinds of materials and basically served almost as a fundraising arm of Portland Town Council also. These are a couple of the events that were mounted or put on by the Diversity Alliance, and we worked hand in hand with one of the local musical groups, the Dyke Tones, and it was really fun working on material for them. The early 80s was really quite a period of time for cities and towns all across the country, basically celebrating lesbian and gay pride. And so this is an example of a poster I created, and the cover of one of the first local gay newspapers, because at that time, gay men mostly were struggling to include lesbians in what they were attempting to do. So it was in '84 when I got my dream job. I started working for Willamette Week, and it was really exciting to work for Willamette Week because it is a news alternative, part of the alternative news. And so it was a really good way of keeping in touch with progressive issues around the state of Oregon and the city of Portland. When I started, I really just worked as a production assistant, and I designed ads and ad space and things like that. But bit by bit, I became very much influenced by the art director at that time, Reed Darman. And he really served as a mentor for me. So there were a few times when he would go on vacation, I would take the reins of the paper and become the art director. This one issue of the paper, Tom Moyer's Downtown Drive-In. Tom Moyer was part of a movie theater chain here, and the article is about building a garage on top of this really beautiful building. And so I decided to, kind of combine a parking meter with the marquee of the theater. I did an illustration. It was really, once again, a really lift in my confidence when I was able to do illustrations for publications and have them published. So this was an illustration that I did when I was doing art directing duties for Fresh Weekly, which was the arts and entertainment section of Willamette Week. I also used to work on advertising supplements within the paper and flyers. And so this interior section was one of the first articles that I was able to be a part of as the designer. And then the other two images are illustrations that I did during that period also. So I think it was around 83 or 82 when Just Out was first published. And the history of Just Out, really briefly, is amazing to me because it has to do with Renee LaChance and Jay Brown, a young lesbian and older gay man, were working for a newspaper at the time here in Portland. And the newspaper, it was called Cascade Voice. It didn't really serve the needs of the community in terms of the queer community being very diverse. And Renee and Jay decided that they were going to start their own paper, and they approached me knowing that I was an art director and wanted me to do the initial design of the paper. I look back on those issues and they're incredibly crude, and it's really hard for me to look at them. But the newspaper did set the standard for a lot of queer publications across the country, because each newspaper pretty much got got copies of other publications from other cities. And so Just Out, I just think, was one of the newspapers that happened to have, be able to employ someone who actually was responsible for designing the paper. And so that was a real big feather in the hat of Just Out. And eventually we won the Gay Press Association for best overall design. And we won that a couple of years in a row. These are just a couple of illustrations during the time, early 80s, when I was working as a designer and an illustrator. Another illustration, scaffolding with a broken heart. And Brown Bomber and Diva ended up running in Just Out, and eventually other newspapers across the country picked the strip up. These are examples of just some of the general work I was doing at the time. This is a really interesting, I think, example of trying to design for a group with a certain name. When I designed this pamphlet, it was for a group called Oregonians Against the Death Penalty. And I had this graphic of this guy slumped over with a light switch on his head. And that worked really well with Oregonians Against the Death Penalty. It was very clear what that image meant. But there was so much bickering among the people who were part of the group. They decided that there was something too powerful, I guess, about Oregonians Against the Death Penalty. And so they changed the name of the group to Oregonians for Humane Justice, which was so frustrating to me because the illustration could have been assisted suicide or something. So it was a very weird experience for me to understand kind of the power of the image with, what the name of an organization or a group was at that time. At this point in my design career, I actually ended up getting laid off from Willamette Week. They had some kind of efficiency expert come in and they ended up cutting, a large part of the staff. So I went into full freelance mode at that point. And so I was very lucky and very happy to become involved with the theater community in Portland. And so I did a lot of posters and programs for those groups. This is a SUDS program, which was an original production by one of the really outstanding theater groups in Portland at the time called Storefront Theater. This is another independent theater group, Actors Laboratory, and this was a poster I designed for the production of Bent, which is a really powerful story about gays being prosecuted during the Holocaust. And then I started doing work also hand in hand. I was doing a lot of work for Portland State University for their theater department. And these are just more opportunities for me to really explore the world of design. And I just could not have been more delighted about having the work. And I was so passionate about the design work. I would have done it free, but I was really only charging very little for the work I was doing because I really believed in the organization so much that it was like volunteer work to do design work for them and just get something on the side. This is an example of what I wanted to refer to as cohesion out of chaos. There's a organization here in Portland called the Cascade AIDS Project. And at one point, I was approached by them to kind of spruce up their neighborhood word newsletter. And what was really difficult for me with the way it was being done before is so many of these organizations that are really worthwhile organizations, they don't have the funds to actually pay someone to do design work for them. So once again, I would volunteer but get a little, honorarium for doing the work. And so it was really important for me to kind of collect a number of organizations to do that, have that kind of arrangements with them. So this is the redesigned neighborhood word. And we were able to reduce the calendar to a smaller size. And I really wanted to incorporate more graphics into the newsletter. This is towards the end of my stay in Portland. I got to the point where I really thought that I might want to leave Portland to just pursue other opportunities. One of my passions was being associate art director of Willamette Week and Fresh Weekly during the periods I was able to take that position. And at one point, the equivalent of Willamette Week, the weekly in Seattle, was advertising for an opening as art director there. But this is an example of a couple of sketches I did as a part of applying to that, for that position. It's unfortunate I didn't get that position, but I ended up moving to the Bay Area for 7 years, and I ended up being art director for a number of publications there. The most pivotal one being SF Weekly, and I was art director there for a number of years. So after living in the Bay Area for 7 years, I moved back to Portland in the early 90s. And what I would really want to say about that is all of the previous design work that I exhibited here was done old school, in the old school style. It really involved waxers and border tape and going to typesetters and going to photo places to, get images transferred to, just photostats. And when I came back to Portland, it was like the height of desktop publishing. And I went into the world of desktop publishing kicking and screaming a little bit. But once I really got the hang of it, it was just really another creative explosion for me. So I've just really enjoyed the versatility and the hands-on quality of doing my work on computer. So this is pretty much it. This is an overview of my career as a designer, kind of the tip of the iceberg. And I've just really been committed to various communities. And I've just really wanted us to be able to put our best foot forward in terms of the material that goes out into the community at large. So that's it.
Thank you so much, Rupert.
Sure.
I love all of this work, and it excites the design nerd historian in me. Hopefully, some of the rest of you feel the same. I'm wondering, to start Q&A, actually, if I could just prompt you to introduce kind of a little bit of your comic work too. I know I'm the one that directed you towards the Portland era and the more of the publication work, but just because I have a couple questions that relate, do you think you could talk a little bit about the creation of the Brown Bomber and that comic series?
Well, the Brown Bomber and his partner Diva Touche Flambe are absolutely one of the most passionate, or one of the aspects of my career that means the most to me. I haven't drawn my comic strips since the mid '90s. As some of you may know, I was involved in a car accident that left me paraplegic in 1996. So I ended up devoting more time to design work than doing my comic strip. But briefly, as a kid, I was really into superhero comics. I learned to draw all of the big major superheroes, and it kind of made me a little celebrity in my neighborhood that I grew up in Chicago. And then I started creating my own superheroes. And at one point, I was very upset when I realized, once I really started becoming influenced by Muhammad Ali and James Baldwin, that these characters that I created were white. They were more reflection of what I was reading in the comic strips and comic books than what my experience was in my own neighborhood. So the first superhero I created was a revolutionary, radical superhero called Superbad. And eventually I ended up creating the Brown Bomber the summer of 1976. And it wasn't, excuse me, until I moved to Portland that I created Diva Touche Flambe as his partner. And it was in 1992, after the comic strip had run in a number of newspapers for a number of years, that I was able to collect comic strips and have them published in a collection called BB and the Diva. And that was one of the highlights of my life when that happened.
Do you mind if I share screen again, and I can share the visuals here so folks can see? Do you want to describe what we're seeing right here?
Well, the Brown Bomber, part of his history that I think I'm the proudest is when the comic strip first started, it was at Cornell College, and it was on the editorial page of the weekly newspaper. And I had drawn the Brown Bomber at Cornell for 2 years, and he basically became a kind of school mascot, to the point where the Black Students Organization, we ended up raising money to establish a scholarship fund for incoming Black students by selling the Brown Bomber t-shirts. We sold like 300 Brown Bomber t-shirts, raised enough money to establish the scholarship. And then in my senior year, latter part of my senior year, is when I had the Brown Bomber come out of the closet as a gay character.
Wow.
So I always thought of it as being very subversive the way I did it, because professors and administrators and students were walking around with their Brown Bomber t-shirts. So I always thought of it as a personal triumph to have done it that way. And then, I started thinking about all the women in my life who meant so much to me. And I started thinking about kind of equal parts of myself that I wanted to express, by way of my comic strip. And so I came up with the name Diva Touche Flambe as what I thought was a whimsical name. And after coming up with that name, I felt like I had to draw a character that was worthy of such a name. So that's how Diva gets her attitude and her look. They're like the two children I never had. And eventually, I started adding different characters to the comic strip, and it was, really quite the event when I created Ray and Kay Sadia as these incredibly conservative Republicans that would bounce off the Brown Bomber and Diva. Especially one night, the Brown Bomber and Diva got the opportunity to babysit Sadia's little son, Gaylord. And the very same evening when the Sadias came back, the Brown Bomber and Diva had influenced their infant to the point that their infant instantly became a radical child. Rabidly radical.
I love it.
To the chagrin of their parents.
And then finally, do you want to describe Diva's methods?
I came up with this concept many years before I actually incorporated it into the comic strip. And it amused me to think that as a Black person, I didn't have to endure the racism, be it microaggressions or larger. I wanted to be able to deal with it with something called slapology. I wanted to believe that as a therapy, I could just smack someone really quickly, and all of a sudden, they would be like these fighter bombers in the World War II movies where the co-pilot is screaming, oh my God, we're gonna die. And then the pilot would slap him and the co-pilot would say, thanks, I needed that. And it would promote clear thinking. So in the comic strip, I ended up having Diva be this expert in the art of slapology. So it was a kind of a very quick roundabout way to, just try to get people to think clearer. But I was nervous about it because I knew people would say it promoted violence. So that's why I didn't use it in the comic strip for many years after I thought of the concept until the Reagan years. Once Reagan became president, I thought, okay, let's unleash this. We have to.
Yeah, I think we all wish we had that superpower.
Yes. But I don't encourage people to only Diva has the the skills to totally do it.
Yeah. So this leads into my first question, which is about finding your voice. So a fellow LGBTQ activist said of you, quote, "He is the person who makes a difference without making a lot of noise, and who lives outside his beliefs in the way he does things." But as we just discussed, your comics do speak much louder and more directly, especially through characters like Diva. Have you had trouble struggling to find your voice, or have you always had it? And do you use your work and your comics and your design work in general as your louder voice?
Well, I can't emphasize enough through the years how much I really realized, knowing that I needed a name for my comic strip, I came up with the name Cathartic Comics. And I simply thought it was a good name for my comic strip. But it really wasn't until years later when I once again was put in a position to kind of examine the content of my work. I started realizing just how cathartic that comic had been for me. Just like in the beginning, when I was outraged that I felt like I had been bamboozled into drawing white comic characters. The first Black comic character I created was this Black superhero with a fro that I described as being able to strike fear in the hearts of all white people. So there's so many ways where I think my work has been an outlet for these emotions I have within me. Um, yeah, I've always wanted to just be a part of helping grassroots progressive organizations um, create more effective communications. You could see a poster that's full of nothing but words, and you glance at it, and there's nothing to pull you into it. If you apply design elements to it, to arrange elements to the point where it will attract more attention. My career as an art director and for publications was really different in that I was a designer who really wanted to be at the service of the written word. So there were designers that I thought were more exciting than I was as a designer, but a lot of times you couldn't read the text. So I always wanted to make the visuals go hand in hand and in some way entice readers to read what was there through the visuals I could supply.
Well, that perfectly leads to my next question, which is about illustration versus page layout, because oftentimes these are separate skill sets that people practice. But you seem to blend them together just perfectly, and the work that you showed today was a great example of that.
You.
So yeah, your career in the 80s, you worked for a lot of publications and did a lot of page layout. And this was a very technical endeavor, as you described, before computers and then after with the advent of desktop publishing.
Yes.
Did you get involved in publications kind of because of your first job with the newspaper, Chicago Sun-Times? Or is that kind of what piqued your interest, or did you have a interest previous to that job?
No, I was really, when I was fortunate enough to have that illustration published in the Sun Times, I was only into drawing, cartooning, and illustrations. The thing that really sparked me to want to be a designer actually was at Cornell College. I became editor of the yearbook the year I graduated, and it was so rewarding to work to make that yearbook the most visually exciting yearbook that the school had. At least that was my goal. And so I found that I did approach designing the yearbook with what I learned, in art classes and design in general. Excuse me. So it was really being editor of the yearbook that sparked my interest in publication design.
Yes, that is a common theme that I have discovered not only with working with Portland Design History as a project that lots of people start with yearbook, but also myself personally. I was on the yearbook committee, and when I talk to students in my classes, they also, lots of them start with yearbook. So it is a common theme among designers that we're drawn to yearbook as
So
the
yearbooks and high school newspapers.
yeah.
Yeah.
Those are great platforms for your young people. So In your career, as you've described, you've done a lot of work for grassroots activist organizations. And if you look back on that body of work, now that we have, decades have passed since you've produced it, what do you feel made the most difference? I know we're kind of ambitious people and we think design can change the world. What work, what pieces, what body of work do you feel it was the most impactful? Maybe not from a design perspective, but just like actually helped effect change.
I mean, in a way, I'd like to say Cathartic Comics. Um, that's been the most rewarding and impactful, I think, just because I've once again I've been made to understand the impact of the comic strip over a number of years. Um, and I have to face it, there's no way BB and the Diva were a part of the general world of comics that include Peanuts, Doonesbury, Kathy, Garfield. There's this real, and superheroes. That's, the world of cartooning and superheroes and characters. And then in the 60s, there, all of a sudden, there was this the underground comics movement where there was this creativity that wasn't going to fit in the format of DC Comics or Marvel Comics. And so obviously there was an explosion of creativity there, and you had your Robert Crumbs and even Alison Bechdel and a lot of the underground gay cartoonists. But then for me, I ended up feeling like I created another category of sub-underground comics. And I feel like that's where we are, Cathartic Comics, because we're not well known at all. So whenever I know of anyone who knows about the Brown Bomber and Diva, it feels like we're all part of this little secret club. So I do feel like Cathartic Comics has been the most impactful thing I've done, but also my involvement with Just Out. Just Out really did change queer publications across the country. I remember when I moved to the Bay Area, there was another publication that I designed, and within a couple of months, we came across a publication from another city. It was a brand new publication. And it was amazing how they basically stole the design idea. They took all these elements that were, put into publications like Just Out and San Francisco Sentinel. And it just felt really good. I would go to these Lesbian and Gay Press Association conferences, and people would be seeking out the Just Out staff because I felt like, Just Out paved the way for a lot of those publications in not only content, but visually. Because once again, I think those publications wanted to become more invested in getting an art director, not someone who could just pull elements together and not have any kind of sense of design.
Yeah. About Just Out, you are quoted as saying, I love this quote, "There is nothing like feeling you're a part of a community when you're a part of a community newspaper."
Yes. Well, even I've had this really interesting career within the lesbian and gay press, but I've also really embraced the career I've had within the alternative press, publications like Willamette Week and SF Weekly. And I really can hardly describe the sense of pride I would get as art director of SF Weekly in San Francisco, being a big city. there was a lot of work involved in designing a weekly newspaper. And after deadline, you're wiped out, you go home, and then the next day, that night the paper gets printed. The next day, I'll be sitting on a bus and I'll look across from me and someone will have that paper holding up, reading it. And I know that they're engaged by it, and those publications are very community minded. As alternative publications, they're exposing corruption and all of these things that are going on in the culture that we should be made aware of. So I have just been profoundly proud to be involved in the publications I have been. And, after I was laid off from Willamette Week, I just really went head first into freelance design. But one of the things I was really happy for when I moved to the Bay Area and became part of working for those publications was that I thrive when I work with a team of creative people. When I worked weekly, I did illustrations every once in a while, but I had a whole stable of illustrators that I really, really admired and really enjoyed throwing assignments their ways. I really love the writers, the production people. Anything I can do at this point to just celebrate what it was like to be a part of that community. Every chance I get, I will celebrate it.
Yeah. It's high energy and high pressure, but then high reward, right? When you see that person on the bus with the paper and you're just sitting there like, I helped produce that. And
Yeah.
yeah.
And I'm as art director, you're part of the visual impact of it, and it's there's nothing more rewarding to me.
So what gives you that sense of community now?
Oh, that's an interesting question. It's various things. I host really for like the last 12 years, I've been hosting a racism dialogue group in my home. And that's been very impactful on a number of levels. The work I've done in the community specifically for queers of color, I was a part of the formation of Brother to Brother in Portland in the early 90s. And it catered specifically to African American gay men. Then we had a group called Black Lesbians and Gays Together. And it's been very, very exciting to kind of mix those communities. And in my life, I've been, I've been majorly affected by the culture of specifically Black gay men. And it really is, its own culture. And so the freelance work I do, I've been working with a African American theater company here, Passin Art. That gives me a joy. And yeah, any freelance work that I do now usually still has to do with working hand in hand with people who are trying to make a change in the culture.
You have described working on what you call a life capsule project, which is described as a memoir that is a celebration of the communities and social phenomenon that you have been involved in. Can you describe that project for us and tell us the status?
The Life Capsule Project, I've literally been working on for more than 25 years. And I would be embarrassed to say that to you if there was like no representation of 25 years worth of work, but there happens to be. I actually have a prototype. The main problem is that it hasn't been proofread and edited, but this is like 315 pages of the life capsule. It's all here. My vision for it is complete. So this is a weird thing that has happened to me that I really would like to share about the Life Capsule Project, which is I wrote it. It really is like a biography. It's basically an oral history, scrapbook, graphic memoir, photo album. It was a way to tell my story, and it was inspired by Alison Bechdel, who created Fun Home, which was a big hit, New York Times Book of the Year, and was turned into a Broadway musical and won Tony Awards. And Alison Bechdel is a dear friend of mine. And when I read Fun Home, I really wanted to well, I was encouraged by friends. They said they thought my life was interesting enough, and they knew I was a cartoonist. They thought I should do a graphic novel, but I am not in any way disciplined enough to have done anything close to what Alison Bechdel did. So I wanted to do something different. And so that's what the Life Capsule Project is. And so what happened was I took a little thumb drive with all the work I'd done on the book on my computer. I took it to PSU, and they printed out the entire book the way I visualize it. Everything I wanted to put in here is in the book. And unfortunately, what happened was, as a creative person, I was satisfied in a way to have my creation in my hand. I don't have the promotion gene. I have the creative gene. So all the enthusiasm I had for working on the book, it 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 kind of shrunk after I could hold a copy of it in my hand. And I have all these people saying, no, you have to get this out. It's valuable in so many ways. It covers so many bases of a life, you know. It details coming to grips with being African American in this country, the influences, hand in hand with discovering, you know, that I was a gay person. And it's really one of the most, it's my life's work is what it is. But I'm at this point where I'm stalled. And once I knew that the film No Straight Lines was you know, being worked on, that's when I devoted more time to creating the history of Cathartic Comics. So that has kind of been the project that bumped the Life Capsule to the side. The history of Cathartic Comics is called Oops, I Just Catharted. A history of Cathartic Comics. So I focus more on that history in that book because I really thought that I wanted the history of the comic to come out around the time of the film being released, but COVID and other issues, you know, life, personal issues came about. And once again, the history of Cathartic Comics is actually, I would say, 85% done. And so I need another kick in the pants to just kind of, you know, get that done.
I think we can all relate to having these multiple projects going and feeling stalled at different points and needing that jumpstart forward. And we can all relate to having trouble promoting. It's one thing to create the work, and then you just want people to know
Yes.
about it and love it. And there's that extra step.
Well, it seems like the secret is I know how passionate I am about the design and the creation of it. So then what you have to do is hook up with someone who's passionate enough about the content of your work. And they're also the ones passionate about getting it out there. So that's my challenge.
Well, hopefully, maybe someone on this call can step forward and support and help get you to that point. So,
I've
because
I've
I'm
had a
sure.
lot of, I've gotten,
Go ahead.
Oh, no, no, go ahead.
I was just saying, I'm sure we all on this call are excited to see it.
Oh, well,
I did want to
I,
jump into the questions from the chat with the last
great.
15 minutes we have. So these are questions from the audience. You made career choices that many designers and illustrators still face. Um, Work and causes you care about over profit. Were there ever projects or roles that you turned down because they conflicted with your values? And do you have advice for others deciding what kind of work to pursue?
I've been fortunate enough, any creative job I've ever had has been within a pretty progressive community. There's no doubt. But when I moved to Portland in '79, lived here for 6 years, moved to the Bay Area in '86, and was there for 7 years. And then when I again for my income, and I ended up recently, but I worked there for a couple of months. And I thought, this just doesn't mean anything to me. I'm designing this program that goes out to people to see what, and that's just how important it was for me to work for an organization or a business that I really believed in. So that's the main example of something that I did that didn't have to do with, that didn't really coincide with my values. And it's not like it was a bad thing. You know, people need their cable guys. And this was in the kind of the early days of cable television. But I just really realized that I had no passion for the work and I needed that passion. And interestingly enough, I left that um, publication and I started working for the Portland Scanner, which is one of the premier African American newspapers here in Portland. And so that was very exciting. That really fed that need to, be working at a place that I really, and the advice I do have for younger people when it comes to that, um, I just think you really do have to go with what you're passionate about, and I think more and more there are opportunities to work within those worlds, where you can really feel like you're a part of something bigger than yourself.
Absolutely. Another question is also kind of advice for younger designers, but more about process and technology. What wisdom or advice can you impart to new school desktop designers that never had a chance to use the hands-on design tools of the pre-computer days? So you have a unique perspective in that you have existed in both worlds and made that transition. So what advice do you have for
Mhm.
the people who never got to do things the hard the hard way with the manual tools?
I hate to admit this, but I have no advice. I think they're lucky in a way. Um, the amount of control you have, and you're right, my experience with how it was done before is one of the things that really makes me really truly appreciate the amount of control I have over the work I'm doing. I mean, the idea of um, writers wanting to rephrase a paragraph, or the whole concept of working on correcting typos, this is that was a whole new, whole different world than it is now. Really, the degree to which I'm in control of type is probably the most exciting part about that transition. And photo manipulation, that's another one. I look back at, to the way it was done before, and it's like, I don't know how we did it.
That's how I feel too. It's a
It was
mystery.
a labor of love.
So you don't look fondly on the days of wax and glue?
I can't say that I don't look fondly on it, because I kind of, there is some nostalgia involved with what felt like pure hands-on. I mean, you're sitting there, putting the line that separates the columns. You're aligning the columns to make sure that they're even all the way. There was a craftsmanship involved in it that I think I will always appreciate. And I think it really does give me a greater appreciation for, how things have advanced.
Mhm. Yep, that was what I always struggled with, the craftsmanship. Okay, so one more question is more general. Who has influenced or inspired your design and illustration styles?
Oof. Um, well, I really love using this as an opportunity. I mentioned him earlier. Reed Darman became the art director of Willamette Week when I first started. And he was just such a great designer to open yourself up, or open myself up to be, influenced by his work. I loved his use of type. So he was someone who really influenced me, who I knew, and we're friends, personal friends. But some of the other ones, there's a designer, um, Glasser.
Mm-hmm.
Um, for some reason, I can't think of his first name.
Milton.
But he did a lot of kind of pop art design and magazine design, very visible during the 70s and 80s. And then there's this designer, Saul Bass, who designed a lot of movie, what do you call them? The beginning of movies, the title. Yeah.
Title sequence.
Yeah, he did Psycho, and there's a number of To Kill. I don't think he did To Kill a Mockingbird, but I can't think of a lot of. But he has such
Vertigo.
a Vertigo. Yes, um, yeah. His work was so exciting to me. The whole idea that I would go and see a movie, and the movie would start, and his style was so distinctive that I would notice it right off.
Yeah, here you are 30, 40 years later thinking about that title sequence.
Yeah, exactly. And he also did product design, like logos, that type of thing. That was always really exciting to me. Kind of that whole world of logo design. I've dabbled in it a little bit. Me and my partner Scott, we own a guest house, and it's called the Kinley Manor Guest House, and I designed the logo for it. And to this day, I think it stands as a really wonderful logo. When you've been a designer for so long, it's always interesting to look at the older things you've designed, and you can kind of more so figure out what stands the test of time. So yeah, I was really influenced by a number of those guys in terms of attempting to do logos every once in a while, but I think I've failed more than I've succeeded.
Logos are very hard. They're deceptively difficult.
Yes.
So my final question is about music. So, an article by Portland Monthly in 2019 said that you occasionally DJ at a local bar. I assume that was stalled because of uh, the pandemic, but I'm wondering, have you started back up? And where were you DJing, and what was your go-to track?
Um, I DJ'd. I was a freelance DJ, so there would be, once again, there were lots of events that would happen, um, uh, events that were fundraisers, and I became known as a DJ that can kind of keep people on the floor. And the thing is, I've always proudly um, announced that I'm a old school DJ. I like the funk bands, Earth, Wind, and Fire, old school Stevie Wonder, Temptations. Um, I always, I think the success in my being a DJ is that I didn't experiment on people. I really wanted to always play music that they were familiar with, that people were familiar with. So I haven't DJed for quite a while, and I'm just open to it at this point once the pandemic really dies down. But it's another thing I'm passionate about. Scott and I are known around Portland for the house parties we've thrown. And one of the reasons those house parties are so exciting is that you'll never find yourself in a more diverse crowd of people, first of all. And once you have the reputation as a DJ, when you throw a house party, people come. You don't have to beg people. They want to get their aerobic on, their aerobics on.
So you got people to these events back in the day and even today, and then you kept them engaged and moving.
Yeah, it was so exciting. I remember the first time this organization that is really dear to my heart, the Lesbian Community Project, wanted me to DJ one of their earlier fundraisers. And I was just so honored, to be invited to DJ for them. And there's just nothing more thrilling than keeping people on the dance floor.
It's
They
another
want to
way of,
leave because they're tired, and you go, "Oh no, I have another song for you. You're not going to leave the dance floor once you hear this one."
yeah, it's another way of creating community, really.
It is, and one of the most rewarding things that I've experienced in Portland, and I've experienced a lot, is for someone to come up to me and say, "Aren't you Rupert Kinnard?" And I'm thinking, oh, they must know the Brown Bomber or Diva, or they know me as an activist. And they will say, "Oh, I went to one of your parties. I couldn't believe how much I danced." And I thought, oh, I forgot about that part of,
That's fun.
my being in Portland.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We have reached the end of our programming. Caitlin, do you have any final thoughts?
I just want to let folks know it's 10 o'clock. I know everyone has other commitments and don't want to run you over. Thank you so much, Rupert and Melissa, for being here, for having this conversation with us. And I hope that everyone can take away some of the same grace and wisdom and retrospection that, Rupert, you seem to be able to do with all of your creative work throughout your career. It's been really lovely
Well,
to learn from.
I want to make it clear again how much I appreciate this platform. In the process of pulling together samples of one's work, it's just the opportunity to shed a new light on what it is you've accomplished throughout your career is really a unique experience. And a lot of times I just don't think I would have that perspective without, being offered this opportunity to do this presentation. So thank you guys from the bottom of my heart. I really appreciate it.